Welcome back. Today, we join a craftsman as he brings an abandoned Ford Galaxie back to life. With nothing but hand tools, patience, and a dirt driveway. The first step is establishing a rolling chassis. A vehicle left sitting sinks into the earth, accelerating frame rot. Getting the heavy weight off the flattened rubber and onto fresh tires stabilizes the structural steel. New rubber is mounted directly to the original steel hubs. Corrosion on the lug threads is expected after years of exposure, but securing them tightly ensures the car can be safely moved. With the chassis supported on jack stands, the heavy layers of organic decay can be washed away. Paint cannot be accurately assessed until the dirt is gone. Under the hood, nature has entirely reclaimed the engine bay. Compressed air is used to blast away dry leaves and decades of dust. Clearing this combustible debris is critical to prevent fires once the cast iron block reaches operating temperature. Tight spaces near the exhaust manifold naturally trap moisture and organic matter. Every leaf and rodent nest must be evicted before any mechanical teardown begins. Cleanliness dictates the success of a restoration. The old ignition wires are pulled loose from the engine block. Thick rubber insulation becomes brittle over time, losing its ability to carry high voltage efficiently. Using a ratchet extension, the craftsman removes the original spark plugs from the deep cylinder heads. Fouled plugs tell the history of a motor. Carbon buildup indicates poor combustion, offering immediate clues to the health of the internal components. To inspect the top end, the perimeter bolts are backed out. Exposing the internal valve train allows a direct look at the mechanical heart of the Ford block. This visual check confirms whether outside moisture has penetrated the critical moving parts. The rocker arm assembly is heavily coated in old, degraded oil. Yet the metal springs and valves remain remarkably intact. Electrical systems degrade silently in damp environments. A new starter solenoid is bolted firmly to the inner fender wall. This electromagnetic switch is responsible for sending high amperage from the battery down to the starter motor. Fresh connections guarantee reliable power transfer. The valve cover is temporarily reseated to prevent debris from falling into the open cylinder head. Working near the rusted firewall requires patience and the right leverage. A long extension bar reaches the final spark plugs tucked deep against the rear of the block. Thread damage here would require pulling the entire engine out of the chassis. Inside the cabin, the vintage wiring harness is a tangled liability. Frayed connections are stripped back to clean copper, and new terminal connectors are securely crimped into place. A weak ground or an exposed positive wire can drain a battery overnight. A standard test light confirms the circuits are live, restoring the flow of electricity to the vital dashboard systems. Fresh spark plugs are threaded into the cast iron cylinder heads, carefully by hand, to prevent cross-threading. Once seated flush, they are torqued down to factory specification. New, heavily insulated spark plug wires are pushed firmly onto the terminals. A solid physical connection ensures the ignition spark is delivered precisely at the top of the compression stroke. Simultaneously, the under-dash electrical routing is methodically tidied up. Mounting bolts near the electrical resistor are tightened to ensure a solid mechanical ground. In older 12-volt automotive systems, clean metal-to-metal contact is the absolute foundation of reliability. The final ignition wires are clipped securely into place. A small amount of fuel is poured directly into the carburetor bowl to prime the bone-dry delivery system. With the ignition refresh, attention shifts to the underside of the chassis. The rusted exhaust pipe, extending from the rear, requires immediate assessment. Decades of sitting over damp grass accelerates rust on untreated steel tubing. The structural integrity of the heavy undercarriage dictates exactly how much of this exhaust system can actually be salvaged. The mechanical fuel pump is unbolted from the side of the engine block. Internal rubber diaphragms dry rot after sitting in stale gasoline, necessitating a complete bench rebuild. Moving to the top of the engine, the Holley carburetor is prepped for extraction. Rubber vacuum hoses and stiff metal linkages are disconnected. The heavy cast body is lifted away from the intake manifold and placed into a drain pan to catch the residual toxic sludge. Disassembly reveals the full extent of the internal decay. Old paper gaskets bake onto the metal surfaces and must be carefully scraped away without gouging the flat mating flanges. Aerosol solvent is blasted through the primary fuel bowls. Every tiny brass orifice and passage must be perfectly clear for the engine to idle smoothly. After hours of meticulous cleaning, the rebuilt unit returns to the intake manifold. Aligning the bulky carburetor onto the mounting studs requires a delicate touch to avoid pinching the new base gasket. As the engine runs, a digital thermometer monitors the cast iron block. Operating at 163 degrees indicates the cooling system is circulating water efficiently. Keeping temperatures strictly within the factory threshold prevents the heavy cylinder heads from warping under extreme thermal stress. Fresh synthetic brake fluid is poured into the master cylinder reservoir. Hydraulic systems naturally attract moisture over time, rusting the steel lines from the inside out. Replacing the old contaminated fluid restores crucial hydraulic line pressure. The brake pedal is pumped manually to purge trapped air from the lines. Air compresses, hydraulic fluid does not. A firm pedal guarantees stopping power when thousands of pounds of steel are in motion. The steering column shifter is moved through the transmission detents. Engaging the gears verifies the mechanical linkage to the transmission valve body is still functional. At the rear, illuminated taillights signal that the difficult electrical routing is successfully completed. A light rain sets in, but the diagnostic work continues. To locate a suspected exhaust leak, combustion fluid is introduced into the running carburetor. This intentionally rich mixture produces thick, visible smoke during the combustion cycle. Billowing clouds force their way out of any hidden cracks or failed gaskets in the exhaust system. The heavy white smoke rolling from beneath the chassis pinpoints a significant fracture in the manifold. An issue requiring immediate, high-heat intervention. 50 years of heat cycling essentially welds factory bolts into cast iron. Attempting to turn them cold would simply snap the steel heads off. An oxyacetylene torch is used to introduce massive, localized heat to the rusted fasteners. As the cast iron rapidly expands under the bright orange flame, it breaks the molecular bond of the rust. This thermal shock technique is a slow, methodical process. Patience here prevents hours of drilling out broken studs later. The focused flame is held steady until the metal reaches a dull cherry red. Working in the cramped darkness of the engine bay, the craftsman uses a socket wrench to coax the hardware loose. Leverage and extreme heat do the heavy lifting. Slowly, the corroded threads finally surrender. A small mirror allows a visual inspection of the hidden structural damage on the underside of the manifold. Welding cast iron requires immense, sustained heat to prevent the surrounding metal from cracking as it cools. The bright arc of the welder bites into the thick metal, laying down a new seam of molten wire to bridge the fracture. Precision is critical when working this close to the main engine block. The completed weld leaves a rough, fused, circular patch. It is not aesthetically perfect, but it fully restores the airtight seal the exhaust system demands. To secure the repair, a new mounting point must be fabricated. A drill bit cores out the damaged opening, followed by a hardened steel tap. Cutting fresh threads into the cast iron allows a new bolt to anchor firmly. The resulting metal shavings are carefully cleared away. With the manifold repaired and completely cooled, the surrounding hardware is reassembled. The craftsman reaches deep beneath the block to hand tighten the final flange bolts. A sealed exhaust ensures back pressure remains consistent, which is vital for smooth engine performance. The mechanical throttle linkages are manually checked for play. These solid steel rods directly connect the driver's input to the carburetor valve. Checking for bind or loose connections prevents the throttle from dangerously sticking open during operation. Inside the cabin, the physical geometry of the pedal assembly is tested. The metal accelerator is pressed firmly into the red carpet, verifying full travel of the linkage arm. Every tactile response from the driver's seat must translate smoothly to the engine bay. A highly responsive pedal is the foundation of driver control. By nightfall, the focus shifts much deeper into the engine architecture. Restoration work often bleeds into the late hours, driven by the sheer momentum of problem solving. The illuminated garage becomes a sealed environment to isolate the intricate, quiet tasks ahead. The internal valve train requires a deeper inspection. A power drill rapidly backs out the remaining pedestal bolts, allowing the entire rocker arm assembly to be lifted free. These oil-soaked components pivot thousands of times a minute to open the engine valves. Removing them provides clear access to the long push rods and hydraulic lifters seated below. A hydraulic lifter is secured in a bench vise for thorough cleaning. These small steel cylinders rely on constant oil pressure to maintain zero lash in the valve train. Wiping them free of stubborn sludge ensures the internal check valves operate without hesitation. A brief test drive in the rain highlights immediate mechanical needs. Water droplets streak the glass as the heavy car moves under its own power. The feedback from a live run strictly dictates the final tuning adjustments. Used bins are systematically sorted for missing brackets. However, critical internal wear items cannot be salvaged from a scrap pile. New, precision-machined components are unboxed to replace bent or fatigued metal. The replacement parts are carried into the workspace. Fresh steel push rods are dropped perfectly into their designated lifter cups. These rods transfer upward motion from the camshaft directly to the rocker arms. Perfectly straight push rods guarantee precise valve timing, eliminating the ticking noise of excessive clearance. The red steel valve cover is firmly clamped back down. Long-handled wrenches provide the final, measured torque to compress the perimeter gasket completely evenly. A final inspection confirms the critical valve train clearances. Compression is the true measure of any engine's internal health. The cylinders are now sealing tightly, ready for optimal, powerful combustion. Fuel delivery is fine-tuned by swapping out the internal carburetor jets. Installing slightly larger brass jets richens the air-fuel mixture. This directly compensates for dense, cold air and keeps the engine running robustly under heavy load. Fresh high-octane gasoline is poured into the tank. Combustion relies on clean, volatile fuel, not the varnish left behind by decades of neglect. The chassis rolls out, finally bearing the weight of its own history. The restored Galaxie hits the open tarmac. Dashboard needles sweep across their vintage gauges, translating mechanical effort into measurable data. The heavy steering wheel requires deliberate input, a stark contrast to modern electronic lamps. Trailing exhaust smoke dissipates into the damp air as the heavy V8 engine stretches its legs. Every mile driven now is a testament to the methodical hours spent cutting, welding, and tuning in tight confines of the garage. Back in the driveway, top-off fluids are administered to maintain the newly established equilibrium. What was once a scrap pile sinking into a dirt yard is a working machine again. It is revived, not factory perfect, and entirely honest about its scars. Every hidden weld, cleaned thread, and torqued bolt is what its renewed reliability now rests upon. In the end, this heavy steel architecture and the open road operate as one system, a machine that runs, breathes, and sustains itself. Some things are simply worth the long road back. The empty garage waits.